Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting Q&A from the Cal Falcons crew. Today was banding day, where all the chicks got their official USGS bands that identify them for life. And we found out what their sexes are, and we're getting ready to start up the naming contest a little bit later today. So I'm Sean Peterson.
And I'm Lynn Schofield, and Sean Peterson, you are a UC Berkeley alumnus, and I'm a ornithologist with the Institute for Bird Populations. So in theory, we should be able to answer some bird questions here. All right, but we're going to narrate a little bit about what's going on, since I think that's a lot of what people are curious about, but we'll keep an eye on questions that people have as we go. Also tell us if sound or captioning is not working so you can try to address it. Anyways, here we are at step one, where a blanket has been put over the falcons. And like a lot of other animals, especially very visual animals like the falcons, when they don't have visual input, they will calm down quite a bit. So the first couple that this is Zika Glux, our brilliant bander from Santa Cruz Bird Observatory. But so first step is to just...
I'm going to actually interrupt right here. We just saw Zika move the unviable egg towards the back of the box. And a lot of people have been asking us, why don't we remove that egg when we come and band? And basically, we just want to absolutely minimize any disturbance to the nest site and make sure that everyone in the nest is as comfortable as possible with having driven the intruders away without any change to the nest site. So we don't want them to think that they are potentially have lost an egg, even though we know it is unviable.
All right, and there Zika is carefully taking the falcon into her arms. Did we have someone driving the cam here?
Drive. Okay, so we will see some better angles. Some of the tools that you'll see Zika use are a little leg gauge that has little indicators for how big the leg is. How we identify...
There we go. She's picking up the leg gauge now.
How we identify the sex of the falcon is based on the size of their legs. So we're looking at right here on the tarsus. It's actually on the human equivalent would be right here. But that part of the leg has a particular width that is different between males and females, and it has reached full size at this age. So we are able to tell if they're a male or a female right away by measuring their legs.
Yeah, and it's not just legs alone. It's legs and also wing length, and a few other measurements are important to know for sure. But yeah, the males are quite a bit smaller than the females. So with a few different measurements, you can be pretty confident, with what's the confidence interval on it? There, like there's
95+% confidence.
Yeah. But so there she is, selecting the individual bands that she will put on the birds. And you can see that there are two kinds of bands there. One is the silver band that's distributed by U.S. Geological Services, who are the ones who keep a major database of all bands that have been put on all birds of every kind, from raptors to hummingbirds. And so that is a totally unique code. And then the other one is a kind of band that is referred to as a visual ID band, and the numbers are big enough that you can see it through binoculars and actually get a good idea of what bird you're looking at without having to have it literally in hand.
So first question we have here is, do we know the chicks' genders now? Yes, we do.
Yeah, so we know their sex, again, based on measurements Zika took. We know their sex.
Yeah. The two females and one male. And this is the first year, as this is the other question here, that there have been more females than males at this nest site. We've never had more females than males. Annie has very heavily skewed towards male chicks in the past, and that's just random chance. Same with humans. It is a chromosomal sex determination. So there's a 50-50 chance that you will get a male or a female chick.
Let's see. So
I actually really like that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because we're looking at a bunch of poop that Zika is sitting in. It must smell crazy up there. How acute is their sense of smell? First part of your question, it actually does not smell that bad up there. Having been up there for banding and Lynn has as well, it's not too bad.
There's a dusty, feathery smell.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to what you'd smell around chickens.
Yeah. And for falcons, they have a sense of smell, but it's not their main sense of smell. Their main sense of smell is really vision, and that's what their brain is developed to really handle. Most birds do not have great sense of smells, with a couple of exceptions. One of the more common ones you'll see around the Bay Area are turkey vultures, which have an incredible sense of smell. They can smell rotting meat from miles and miles and miles and miles away. But most birds do not have that highly developed sense of smell because they don't need it.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a little bit of back and forth about the sense of smell in birds. Now, turkey vultures have a big olfactory bulb, so similar to what is in a mammalian brain for processing smell. And most birds don't have a very enlarged one, so it's been assumed that that must mean they don't have very strong senses of smell. But for example, pigeons, it does turn out, experimental studies have shown that they have a very acute sense of smell and can even navigate with smell, but they don't have an enlarged olfactory bulb. So it's actually a little hard to know for sure. And all right, so we're seeing Zika, that big tool that Zika is using there, that is...
it's a rivet gun.
Yes, it's a little bit intimidating looking, but what that is so the band, the visual ID band, goes around the leg and then has a very small tab where a rivet is fitted into. So the rivet gun just affixes the rivet on the two little tabs of the bands. And so that is what she's working on right now. And now she's just adding a little bit of tape to the silver band because just while the chicks are in the nest still, it'll be easier to tell them apart on camera without having to get close enough to see the letters.
And the tape is also very useful for fledging purposes.
Yes.
Because it's often you don't see the visual ID band easily, and it's sometimes hard to read the numbers when you're talking about a tower that's 350 feet tall. So being able to see that single color that's different between all three chicks, it can be really helpful for people during fledging time.
All right. So I figure we should address this question because people do often have concerns about well-being. So how come Annie and Lou haven't come back to see them yet?
Yeah, there's still a little bit in defense mode, but really at this age, Annie's not going into the nest box that much. She mostly is coming for feeding, and they ate banding. So they're kind of set for a little bit. Annie's right there on the balcony keeping an eye on everything, but she's probably not going to go into the nest box until it's feeding time.
And then here's a good question because it turns out we have an interesting answer. Was the defense of the nest very aggressive this year? It looked that way.
It was. This was perhaps a more aggressive defense of the nest this year than we have had in previous years. They were pretty aggressive in trying to drive away the intruders.
Yeah, and then just to go back as an aside, so what kind of tape are they using?
It's a colored electrical tape.
Yeah, so it's not designed to last the bird's lifetime. It's just designed to last long enough to be able to differentiate them easily while they're still on the nest cams and while fledging is occurring.
Yeah, and we've had the tape fall off within like a couple of weeks of the first flight in past years. It doesn't last that long.
Yeah. All right, so we get this question on and off, and it's a pretty good question. And it's a good question because I don't think anyone for sure knows the answer, but would Annie recognize her offspring from previous years if they encountered each other again?
I have to imagine that she would probably recognize it. They do a lot of recognizing individuals by vocalization sounds, and Annie would know the sounds of her chicks' voices. But we haven't had any evidence in other nests that have been monitored that any offspring would be treated differently than any other intruder. So if one of Annie's chicks showed up to this territory, she would probably try to drive it away. And unfortunately, with a lot of these behavior questions, they're really phenomenal questions, but we can't ask the birds, so we just don't know the answer.
Yeah, I will say that it is known that inbreeding is very rare in peregrine falcons based on some genetic studies and just studies of banded birds in communities. So that probably suggests that there is some recognition of their offspring that is partially, helping them avoid that. And then here again is a question I don't know the answer to, but it always is interesting to speculate. Would the chicks remember this experience and feel fearful of humans in the future?
And, I would imagine they do recognize or remember this experience, and birds generally have pretty good memories. They're especially in species like peregrine falcons or other larger birds. How much of this would influence their behavior, I don't know. I don't think there's been any evidence that birds that have been banded as chicks have been more aggressive in defending their nest sites against humans in subsequent years, or have avoided nesting near humans in subsequent years. So that might be a really good study, but I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I guess I can say based on observations doing misnetting of raptors during migration, they do seem to recognize the sites where they got captured and do not get captured multiple times typically. So they probably, if the birds are remembering that at some point they ran into a misnet in a place, they shouldn't go back there. So I imagine there is some memory of this as well. All right. And here is a question we definitely know the answer to.
So I'm surprised Zika didn't use gloves. Is there a reason to be bare hands? And yes, there actually is a very good reason to be barehanded in all of this work. The first, the most important thing in all of this stuff that we're doing with banding birds is to keep the birds safe. And we have a lot of tools and a lot of equipment around that we don't want to be pinching bird skin, pinching bird feathers, and potentially risking harm to the bird. So a lot of that has to do with being able to actually feel and touch these very small moves that you're doing as you're banding the bird. So it's all about bird safety. And so keeping the bird safe is our primary goal. And that's why we don't wear gloves while banding. Also, when during COVID, they did request that banders use gloves. And when you're doing peregrines while wearing like nitrile or other thin gloves, they get shredded so fast that they're pretty much just useless.
Yeah, and so the bander does instead, of course, have to take care to wash hands and clothes after interacting with the birds. For reasons relating to any sort of disease vectors, but the nitrile gloves are not helpful. And then leather gloves to try to protect from the talons are just too difficult to work with. All right, so a couple people observed that some feathers have been pulled from each chick and put into some envelopes. What is the purpose of that?
Good question. So these feathers are being gathered for two different studies being performed on peregrine falcons here in the Bay Area. The first has to do with genetic relatedness of the population. So trying to get an estimate of how much gene flow there is between the peregrines in the Bay Area and those outside of the Bay Area, see kind of how isolated this population might be. And then perhaps more importantly is a long-term study of mercury in feathers of these chicks. So there are contaminants in the environment that often affect birds fairly strongly. And mercury is one of those that we are seeing pop up in peregrines. So we want to get an idea of how much mercury is being deposited in these bird feathers. So that is why we are collecting feathers.
Yeah. And we have asked for people for follow-ups because we did get DNA samples from the chicks from last year, as well as, the chicks from every banding that we've done. And part of what we'd like to know is if Alden or Grinnell was the father of either of the chicks. And so we did, and we hope that we will very soon find out the results of that. But the DNA analysis is being done as part of this greater study of understanding the peregrine falcon relatedness and population structure and all of that. So their genetic samples will be analyzed along with all of the other specimens. And so that will take some time because that's part of a bigger project.
All right, so here's a pair of questions that are kind of similar. I don't see the chicks trying to bite Zika, and do you have to worry about a falcon's talons like you would a hawk or an eagle? Generally, not really for the chicks. They are fairly, and they're still developing all their muscles and stuff. If they grab you with their talons, it doesn't really get into you at all. Zika is wearing thicker clothes, so it's not going to go through her clothes very well. And they don't generally bite anyone who's handling them. You mostly have to worry about their feet. But Zika has obviously handled a lot of these birds. She knows exactly what she's doing and how to handle them. And for the most part, their chicks are just not big enough. We just saw her, Zika, taking the feather samples from this chick. But yeah, for the most part, we just don't need to worry about the talons on them.
All right. And so we have a question. So is that female in the nest extraordinarily large?
She is huge. There are two females, and they both have the same band size. So their legs are of similar thickness. So it could be that she's just a few days older than the younger or the smaller female. And and then Zika, the chick starts trying to bite Zika right there. So that goes against what I just said. They like to prove me wrong a lot of the time, don't they? Anyway, it could just be a few days of growth that we're talking about that differentiates those two chicks. Yeah.
All right. So someone's asking, does Lou have more than one wife? Is he a player? He does seem gone a lot. And we can't probably know what Lou is up to in his off hours. But it is very rare for peregrine falcons to be have extra pair relations. They are relatively monogamous within any single year. The genetic study might help reveal if there are instances where in a single year there appears to be chicks with the same father at different locations. But as far as we know, generally, it's very uncommon for a male to be maintaining two nest sites.
Yeah, and generally we have, on the flip side, extra pair paternity is very rare. So it's rare for a female to have chicks from multiple males in the same year. Oh, I gotta do this one. Love the design on the hoodie. That's all thanks to Lynn right here. This is our t-shirt / hoodie this year. We're fundraising for education, outreach, and maintaining CAM, the cam stream. But yeah, I think Lynn did a really wonderful job with the hoodie design this year. There are still some on sale. So go to our website, calfalcons.berkeley.edu, and you can find them.
All right. So how complex is Falcon language? What kind of things were they likely trying to communicate?
Well, man, this is a really tough question. And partially, I am not a expert in avian vocalization. There are people out there who might have a better answer than me. We know Falcon language is relatively complex. They do communicate with each other quite a bit. And I think there's a lot of nuance in the kind of sounds they make. But, animal communication is just this really tough black box that we have not figured out very well at all. I mean, we can't really effectively communicate with most of the species that we're very closely related to. So the species that are really far away from us, it's still just kind of like they're saying something, but we don't know what.
All right. So looking back on some previous posts about pre-contact Lou, there's mention of a Tony.
So Tony is a name for Lou. So Lou and Tony are the same falcon. Prior to getting officially named in our naming contest, some people had gravitated towards the name Tony. So that might be where you saw the name Tony.
So does covering their eyes really calm them? And the answer is actually very much yes.
Mm-hmm.
If people are kind of familiar with the classic image of a falconry bird that is, a falcon or a hawk being used for hunting game, what they are typically fitted with is a hood, which specifically just covers the eyes, and that will substantially calm down the bird. A hood is a little bit better than the blanket because it really does reduce light coming in entirely. The blanket, they can still see a little bit of light and still see around. Yes, the lack of visual stimuli really does calm them and really does work and is what's used for training falconry birds. Okay, this one's just a couple times this was asked. So what do the band colors mean?
Absolutely nothing. They are totally randomly chosen. They're just used to identify the individual chicks more easily when they are leaving or in the nest and then recently after flying. I can answer this one too. What color?
Oh yeah, which one's the male?
Let me look at the notes.
We have that in the notes.
The male is yellow. So we're seeing the male getting his band put on right now. The blue and the red are the females. I believe the red is the largest, so she's probably the oldest.
All right, so we have the question, is this the earliest nesting season for the Cal Falcons? And then I'm going to follow it up with why are they nesting so much earlier than they have in the past?
Yeah, this is by far the earliest we've ever seen them nest by, I think, almost 2 weeks. Maybe it's closer to 10 days. It's remarkably early from what we've seen in the past. So the decision in nest initiation for birds, a lot of calculus goes into that. For birds that migrate, it often is based on when they show up and what the conditions are like when they show up. Annie and Lou are not migrating. They're here all year round. So they are getting a sense of what the conditions are, how cold it is, how plentiful the food is. All sorts of those ideas kind of might play into when Annie decides to lay the eggs. Last year, we saw a very late laying season for Annie. And that, I think, possibly had to do with the fact that a number of floaters, so independent individuals, were checking out the Campanile territory. So the there's maybe more competition, and Annie was not quite as settled in the territory. And that's potentially why it took so long last year. And then this year, there was not as much competition. Maybe she was really happy with Lou and decided to go early.
Let's see. So we had a few early on that were asking this. So there have been some prey items that have arrived in the nest that are banded birds. Where are those from? And then I'll add the other question that people have asked about this. Is that a problem if the chicks ingest the bird band?
Yeah. So the banded birds are all pigeons, and they are all pigeons that are likely either escapees or are racing pigeons. So they are birds that they're catching, pigeons out in the wild that are someone's either escaped pet or racing pigeons. Often the pigeon bands do not have enough identifying numbers to link that pigeon to a owner. So we usually don't have the ability to kind of follow up on those. If we see a bird with a metal band come into the nest, that's when we have a wild banded bird. And we would very much try to retrieve that band or that number and get that reported, because that would be pretty interesting data. The second part of the question was, what happens when the chicks or Annie or someone eats those bands? Usually they just end up in the crop and then gathered up in a pellet. So these birds are all going to be eating a lot of undigestible material, bones, feathers, talons, all that kind of stuff goes in, but can't be digested. So it all gets bundled up in a pellet and then spit back out. So usually we will find those bands inside a pellet.
All right, so here's a question that will give some backstory. Has there been any news regarding Sequoia, who was one of the chicks that hatched in 2020, who showed up at San Jose City Hall, which also has a nest cam, and had started establishing a territory and found a mate. But he did lose his mate, and he lost his mate to avian flu, because the body was found and tested for flu, and that appears to be the cause of death. So what happened to Sequoia?
So after Sequoia's mate died, there was no indication that Sequoia was going to stay at the territory. He was there for maybe another couple of days, and then he left pretty quickly. So we don't know where he is. We have had no reports of him. It's possible that he also contracted avian flu and avian influenza, but we just don't know.
All right. So while you're up there, what did you do to protect yourselves from getting hurt? And the answer is you could see that Zika was, she did have a hat with a brim and her hood up, which is usually a pretty good way of preventing, most advances from the adults, which usually make a lot of noise and will dive on people, but not typically make contact. Although apparently this season, Annie did make contact, and we have determined that this nest site will be helmet mandatory in the future, because Annie has apparently become more bold in her defense of the nest.
So one of the nice things about this nest in particular is the structure is very safe for people. There are these balconies that prevent the birds from really diving down right at you. You can hide behind them. So you have a lot more protection than at a lot of nest sites where the bander is more in the open. So luckily, this is one of the safer sites.
Yeah, that's true. Have we switched now to the live stream and away from the banding video? Yeah. Okay, so we're live again. Let's see. So this is a good question. Will the parents stick around and teach them to fly? Is flying intuitively? When should we expect that?
This is my favorite time of year. It's what I've been calling flight school. So the parents definitely teach them how to fly and how to act like falcons. They will make their first flights, but they stick around with their parents learning how to fly and how to catch their own food and behave and survive in the wild for another 1 to 2 months after their first flight. So it's not totally intuitive. I mean, parts of it are the kind of flapping as you fall are intuitive, but they have to learn a lot to be able to survive in the wild. And unfortunately, it's a really hard thing to do. Mortality is very, very high in the first year for chicks. So only about 50% of the chicks survive their first year. And that's because they need to learn to hunt and care for themselves out in the wild. We are expecting first flights sometime probably around May 21st-ish or so. Might be a little bit on the later side this year because we have 2 females. And because females are bigger, they need to just grow more feathers. Their feathers need to be longer. So it just takes them more time to be ready to fly.
Yeah, and I guess we should add to that. We will be having some Fledge Watch activities on campus when they are getting ready to fly. People spend time below the campanile keeping an eye on how fledging goes. If the fledglings do come off of the tower and find themselves grounded in a place that is unsafe, somebody will be present to be able to bring them back up to a safe location. And generally, we will be having people available to also answer questions as people stop by.
And currently, the plan is to live stream Fledge Watch this year. So if everything goes as according to plan, we'll be out there with cameras and scopes from the ground, streaming everything, and hopefully we'll catch some first flights from these chicks.
Yeah. All right. So another question, just during the banding, are they hyperventilating or vocalizing?
They were vocalizing. I just had it on mute because then there's a weird feedback loop with our software. So they are definitely making a bunch of noise. And it actually varies by the chick's personality. Some chicks are a lot noisier than others. And we see, I think last year, Grinnell Jr., I think, screamed the entire time. He just as soon as someone showed up, he started going and he didn't stop until well after people had left. Whereas Lindsay, I think, was quiet pretty much the whole time.
Also, it's sort of worth noting about how loud the falcons are. So we thought one year that it'd be interesting to have somebody wall up on the tower narrate what's going on with the banding. But it turns out that the microphones are not actually good enough to pick up people talking at a normal to loud voice. So that kind of indicates how loud the falcons are, because they are quite easy to hear on camera. And that means it's quite a lot louder than a human talking by a good margin. So here's a question. Do falcons ever have multiple broods in a year? Do they raise more than one set of chicks ever?
This is a really good question. So in birds in general, this is called double brooding, multiple brooding. It's relatively rare. Some birds do it a lot more frequently than others. Falcons generally don't. If they hatch chicks, or maybe it's even if the chicks have to fledge. Because if the nest fails, if the chicks or the eggs don't hatch, or for some reason that nest is depredated, they'll try again. But if the chicks fly, they definitely won't. And I don't think there's ever been a recording of a double-brooded peregrine falcon.
So is the youngest bird going to be the last one to fledge? Do we know the sex of the youngest one?
We don't. Zika said she was not sure whether the youngest bird was the male or the second smaller of the 2 females. So we know that the oldest chick was a female, so she'll be a little bit delayed. If the male was the second chick to hatch, he could potentially be the first to fly. If he is the last chick to hatch, he also could be flying roughly at the same time as his sisters.
Yeah, it's a little hard to speculate with this situation because, again, it takes a few more days before the females have their feathers fully grown in. But the male does appear to probably be the second or third to have hatched. But
and it's also depends on the chick's personality as well. Some are real go-getters and will fly early. There's been some nests that people have monitored where the chicks fly too early and they keep trying to fly too early. They're real excited about flying, and even though they haven't quite developed it yet.
And I'm remembering, I think it was Poppy in 2020 that fledged many days after what would be considered a typical fledge day. And that was...
She took a long time.
Yeah. Let's see. Do we have any video of Annie's defense antics? Okay.
Yep. The defense video is up on YouTube. So both angles of banding are up. I didn't clip the north side camera because most of the defense was on the west side, but the west side defense is all up.
All right. So do we ever do any sort of DNA testing on the egg at all?
No. So we don't collect the eggs, again, just to minimize any disturbance to the nest site. And we also often the eggs are not in good shape. There's been a couple of years where we've tried to move the eggs slightly to be out of the way, and it's broken as we try to pick it up. So usually there's just nothing there to work with, unfortunately.
So has the avian flu threat subsided at all? Is this still a major concern?
It is not fully subsided. It is still moving around in waves around the country. It's, I think, a little lower right now than it has been in the past. But it varies a lot. It's moving around, especially during migration as birds are moving around. So right now, it's I think maybe not a giant concern, especially for maybe these birds' health. But it's still definitely something that we are thinking about.
We do know that Sequoia's mate had avian flu and died of it. We did have a few weeks ago a live chat with one of the veterinarians from the Minnesota Raptor Center, who is an expert on avian flu, and she answered quite a few questions. So I think you can find that's up on our YouTube channel, right? Yeah. So if you're really curious, she had some good insight about a lot of this stuff. So do we have any thoughts about the personalities of these chicks this year?
The only personality that's really stuck out to me is the big female, because she's the one who's fallen out of the nest twice so far. And I think both times accidentally, but she seems like a real precocious go-getter. So it's possible she might be the first one to fly because she just seems to really be kind of
moving around a lot.
I think the personalities really kick in a lot more in about a week or so when they start moving around the nest box, leaving the nest box, and really kind of exploring on their own.
All right. So if you want to see Annie and Lou in person, when to come out?
Well, I think Lou usually drops breakfast off around 6:30 in the morning. So that's pretty good time to see Lou. If you're there, you'll probably see them right around now because both Annie and Lou, they don't spend much time in the nest box right now, but they're usually at least one of them on the tower. So you should be able to see one of them probably perched somewhere. You always look for someone with binoculars or a camera, see if they can help point them out to you. And if you need binoculars, the Berkeley Public Library has binocular kits available for rent. If you go check them out at the Berkeley Public Library, they have some really nice binoculars to go look at the falcons.
All right, so here's a good question. So what is something East Bay residents, really residents, I suppose, of anywhere where you have raptors, can do to help the species thrive?
So there are two really, really big things that can really help raptors right now. The first is trying to get as much bird-safe window cover out there as possible. Window collisions are one of the biggest mortality dangers, especially for young birds that are flying around for the first time. So it is.
I mean, it's worth mentioning one of the Cal Falcon chicks, Lux, back in 2018. That's how she died, was from a window collision.
Yeah, so getting bird-safe windows is a huge, huge benefit, especially in really tall buildings and tall buildings with a lot of glass. And then the other big one that I would really like to plug is rat poison. There are a lot of rodenticides out there that are still being used, which are illegal in California and really, really, really impact raptors. More often the ones that eat mice, like red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks, get really dramatically affected by those poisons, but it has been found in peregrine falcons as well. So there are a lot of initiatives to make sure that rat poison stations are the correct kind of poison that isn't going to just have a tremendous, tremendous, huge effect on the raptors.
Yeah, and then another one for the sports people out there is lead poisoning is actually very common in a lot of kinds of raptors, more so in things like bald eagles or golden eagles, which have a tendency to feed on carrion. But instead of using lead shot, which is actually no longer legal in California, there is options for copper shot that actually is better for, creates a tighter, what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways,
grouping.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. That's the word. But that's another thing that can be helpful for a lot of raptors. All right. So what is being done to require builders of the glass-sided buildings to help prevent collisions?
That's a really good question. It depends on the locality. There have been laws that are getting passed in Berkeley and other areas in the Bay Area that are requiring new buildings to have or consider bird-safe windows, which often have a specific coating that lets the birds see the windows better than they could without that coating. So it's something that's happening at the legislative level in a lot of cases. So anything that you can do to talk to your local legislators, your city council members, or even kind of larger at the state level would be a tremendous help for these species.
Yeah, and so these coatings work because the birds can see in a broader spectrum of light than humans and mammals can, so they can see ultraviolet, so it reflects that a little more and reduces reflections. And of course, that's all well and good when we're talking about building new buildings, picking the bird-safe glass, but lots of us just personally have some, big windows in our house. And you can actually personally take care of preventing bird strikes, especially with smaller birds and songbirds at your own house, just by there are stickers you can put up. What we do is I just have some kids' fun window markers, and I let my son decorate the windows a bit with the window markers, and we have not had problems with bird collisions. So, yeah. All right, I'll let you try to answer this one. So Annie and Lou are bringing in a lot of shorebirds. Are there water quality issues, contamination issues?
Very good question. So mercury is the primary contaminant that we're worried about. Mercury does stay in the environment a long time, but there are other contaminants. I mean, even DDT is still out there in the environment. There are like metal drums full of DDT that have been sunk out in the ocean outside in the Pacific Ocean out off the Bay Area. So, there are contaminants still out there. Mercury is the big one that they're looking at right now. I think it kind of depends on what environmental contaminants they start to see. And that changes all the time.
Yeah. And, just going back to the, what are some things you can do to help protect things like the falcons, but wildlife in general. I'm a big advocate for those who have yards to make steps to make your yard a environment that different species can actually use as habitat. So that can mean planting some native plants, planting some flowering plants that are good for pollinators and insects, leaving trees with cavities, at least parts of them up for cavity nesting birds to use. That kind of thing is actually makes a really big difference in creating an urban habitat that can support wildlife.
All right, here's back to our egg. I have seen the chicks try to break open the egg, I assume, to eat. Is that egg safe to eat? We have had them eat the egg in most instances where there's been an egg remaining. So they haven't appeared to have any ill effects that we've noticed. So there's some really interesting stuff with raptor biology that relate to what they can eat. And then this often gets scaled up even more when you talk about vultures, but they have incredibly strong stomach acid and are very good at eating stuff that would make most other species really sick. So it's really kind of some cool biological adaptations that they have that allow them to eat some pretty grody stuff.
Yeah, it's true, because we've kind of talked about before that they create caches of food. So if they have extra prey items, they'll stash them somewhere on the campanile or a nearby building, and they might be stashed for a while before they get eaten with no ill effect. Here's just kind of, this is a pair of questions. So this person's mentioning that, and I just read this too, that there's a study that northern gannets, if they get avian flu and recover from it, their irises change color visibly. So that connects to this. Is that observed in raptors?
I have not heard that reported at all, but yeah, this is new information to me. So
yeah. Well, the vet that we talked with at the Raptor Center, she had, treated many birds that had avian flu, not individuals who ended up recovering, but at least the individuals who had it did not show this kind of change.
Oh, there was one owl, great horned owl, that survived that they had treated, and that one had not. She didn't at least mention that it had iris change.
No, and that would be very obvious in an owl if it did. But yeah, I'd be curious to know if it happens in other birds or maybe, sometimes more than others. Oh, here's
one. We missed the big one.
So the leading cause of mortality in songbirds actually turns out to be, and so the leading direct cause of mortality. Of course, mortality can also just come because of
habitat loss and
a lack of habitat available. But the biggest cause of songbird death is actually cats, because cats are fierce predators, and there's a lot of them. And if you are able, it is best to keep your cat indoors, have indoor cats. Our cat is an indoor cat, and also it's better for the cat. I have definitely heard of plenty of pet cats that have been eaten by coyotes. I've known a cat who tragically got shot with a BB gun. So it's really good for the cat, good for wildlife too. Try to have an indoor cat as best you are able.
So just I want to mention, we can see the chick, the largest female there. She was kind of pecking at her band a little bit. And so a lot of times we've had people ask, does the band bother them? Does it kind of irritate their leg at all? Generally, it doesn't. I mean, they still have something on their leg that's new to them. That's a novel thing, but it doesn't impede with or cause any irritation to the birds. So it's not something that banding has been shown to be very, very safe, as well as a very valuable scientific and conservation resource. So it's, even though sometimes, you'll see them peck at the bands, they generally don't bother them.
Let's see. Are we even equipped to handle a question about spay neuter release policies and feral cat colonies? I think I'm able to at least opine a bit on this. The stray neuter release is semi-effective in that, it at least helps feral cat colonies from substantially expanding. But what works a lot better is to actually find adoptive homes as is possible, and to just try to not encourage feral cat colonies, because ultimately feeding feral cat colonies does not really help the individuals in the colonies in the long term. So best policy is to, instead of release them, is to find adoptive homes as much as is possible. And again, with that sort of stuff, it is a bit of as much as it is possible, because it's tough. They're an invasive species. We value them as companion animals. So yeah.
All right. So was Grinnell banded, and was he banded as a chick? Yes, he was banded. He's the only adult falcon that we've had at this nest site who has been banded.
And to make sure, for those people who have not been watching the cams for years and years, like some of us, Grinnell was Annie's first mate, who died last year. And he had a band, and I'll let you continue your train of thought.
Yeah, so he was banded as a juvenile bird. I believe he was brought in as a juvenile, so not from the nest, but after he had fledged, he was taken to rehab and then released after getting banded. So he was from somewhere around Martinez, where he was initially hatched. But yeah, for the most part, we don't know where Annie was from. We don't know where Alden or Lou were from either. We try to band as many of these falcons as we can, but there are still a lot of nests in the Bay Area and outside of the Bay Area that we just don't have good access to. There are birds that nest like on some of the bridges in the Bay Area, and you just can't safely get to those nests to band those chicks. Annie's daughter, Laurentium, aka Larry, who lives on Alcatraz, her nest is in the middle of a seabird colony and is very, very difficult to access. So they haven't been able to band those chicks before. So there's just a decent number of birds out there that we are not able to band.
Yeah, and I will add, the question is, so why is it so important to try to band as many of the birds as possible? What is the value of trying to band a lot of them?
That's a really good question. So, yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So bird banding is really one of those scientific tools that lets us learn way more about how a population is doing than we would if we weren't able to identify individuals. Bird banding has been used to really understand how migration works, how population levels are changing. If we know where the birds are moving to and from and how long they're surviving, we can often understand where there might be different areas with maybe higher or lower survival or dangers. And for conservation purposes, it can be really important to understand where there are gaps in productivity where it's dangerous for falcons to live, especially if it's because of something that people are doing.
Okay, so what happens to these bands as the chicks grow larger? Because the chicks aren't done growing.
Aha, but they are. At least their legs are. So we choose this exact timing for banding because their legs are fully grown. They are not going to get any bigger. So the bands are going to be perfectly sized for them as adults because their legs are exactly as big as they're going to get as adults.
And then back to some of the purpose of banding and trying to get an idea of numbers using, banding.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have an idea of falcon population density?
That is a good question. So I think there are, is it 40 some territories in the Bay Area? So that's pretty good density. Outside of the Bay Area, it's a little bit harder to keep track of a lot of those nest sites, especially the ones that are in the mountains on natural cliff faces. There's a lot of unknown nest sites out there. What we do know is that population density has probably surpassed historic levels in California. There is some really good biologists, ornithologists that did comprehensive surveys of peregrine falcon nests in the early 20th century and found, I think it was like 100 some pairs. And there's definitely over 100 some pairs in California now. So I think they've done an amazing job recovering from DDT and really establishing, especially urban environments as a new habitat.
Yeah, it really is the presence of urban environments creating nest sites that would have never been there in the past, opening up kind of new opportunities for a lot of the birds. Because, for example, UC Davis, which is in the very flattest part of California, does have a nesting pair of peregrine falcons because the buildings suddenly create a high cliff-like nest site that they would not have had before urban areas came up.
All right, so do the talons still grow even though their legs don't? Yes. So their talons are pretty much exactly like our fingernails and will grow throughout their lives. So they constantly are growing new talon to kind of replace any dulling or breakage that they get.
All right.
I think I'm out of time. So maybe we have time for like one more question.
Yeah, we're getting to time to wrap things up. And what do we have any final thoughts, statements?
Yes, we do. We just wanted to send out a huge thank you again to Dr. Zika Glucks at the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group. They do amazing work. It's really worth kind of following up on them and supporting them. If you are interested in supporting kind of peregrine banding efforts, especially in the Bay Area, they are one of the really awesome scientific organizations that we partner with. Wanted to thank Mary Malik for getting everything coordinated and the university for being incredibly accommodating for us kind of taking over their iconic historic building for months at a time and really helping us maintain the nest. I'm just so happy to have such an awesome partner as the university for this nest site.
Yeah, there's a wonderful community of people, and we're really happy that we get the chance to work with everybody, and we do clean the nest eventually.
Eventually we do. A lot of it gets washed away in the rain, but we do come back in the fall and clean the nest. So with that, I think we're going to sign off. Thank you very much. We'll probably have some more Q&A or maybe one more Q&A later in the year as we get close to Fledge Watch.
Yeah,
and then
we'll probably have some Fledge Watch stuff, and hopefully people who are able to will come out onto campus around Fledge Watch so we can talk in person and hopefully see some first flights.
Yep. All right. Bye, everyone.